Hi, this is Ben Cubbage from Whiteboard Jesus, and we are still studying Jeremiah chapter 1. This is our third video from Jeremiah chapter 1. In our first video, we talked about Jeremiah's call and how God had a call for his life, even in difficulty. And in our second video, we talked about Jeremiah as a watchman for God, watching and guarding the promises of God. Now we're going to be talking about Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 17 through 19. And I'm calling this sermon Standing in Difficulty. Let's read the text. In Jeremiah 17 through 19, God commands Jeremiah to be steadfast in the face of coming oppression and opposition. Therefore, prepare yourself and arise, and speak to them all that I command you. Do not be dismayed before their faces, lest I dismay you before them. For behold, I have made you this day a fortified city, and an iron pillar, and bronze walls against the whole land, against the kings of Judah, against its princes, against its priests, and against the people of the land. They will fight against you, but they shall not prevail against you, for I am with you, says the Lord, to deliver you. The text says, therefore prepare yourself and arise. Jeremiah properly saw and understood the two visions. God felt he was ready to go forth with additional preparation and to speak to them all that I commanded you. Do not be dismayed before their faces, lest I dismay you before them. This phrase almost seems redundant and unneeded, like saying, if they discourage you, you will be discouraged. Feels a bit cryptic and even too basic or self-evident to kind of state the same thing twice in one sentence. I think my English teacher would tell me that's a grammar error. But I think the idea is the fruit of our lives is reaped by the root of expectation. If you expect condemnation and you shrink from men's criticism in your mind, it says that we're going to reap that same criticism and condemnation. Think about driving, especially at night. You tend to drive towards what you're looking at. At night on a road with no lights, it's easy to get captivated, even a bit blurrily confused by the headlights of oncoming cars. I find if I stare at the headlights of an oncoming truck that I tend to focus on that truck rather than the road itself or where I'm supposed to be going. In the same way, we need to focus our eyes on where we're going, not looking at the distractions on the road and where we don't want to go. Otherwise, our car will drift in that direction. God gave Jeremiah the strength he needed, but he had to walk in it and focus his vision on the right things. If he did not, if he allowed himself to be dismayed before their faces, then God would dismay Jeremiah before those whom he feared. Jeremiah 1 goes on to say, for behold, I have made you this day a fortified city and an iron pillar. Remember here that Jeremiah is a teenager. He is being called as an international statesman and a speaker. As he looks at himself and his own self-image, certainly Jeremiah didn't feel like a fortified city or an iron pillar. But God's word was true to him, and Jeremiah needed to believe it and act upon it. This tells us that God sees in you more than you see of yourself. If you see a little seed, maybe God sees a mighty tree in you. The passage goes on to say, they will fight against you. The promise of God did prove to be true, but so did the other aspects of the promise. The enemies of Jeremiah did not prevail against him, and he served God with a distinction through great trials for 40 years. To this thin-skinned young man, his description of terms of battlements and heavy metal might have seemed a wild exaggeration, but in fact, it proved an understatement. He would hold out against all comers for over 40 years, outdoing the fortress under siege. That's a quote by Derek Kidner. Moving on to Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 17. We're talking about these last three verses of Jeremiah here. It says, get yourself ready. Stand up and say to them whatever I command you. Do not be terrified by them, or I will terrify you before them. This is another translation of what we're talking about being dismayed in the NIV. When God says, do not be afraid of them, what he means is, do not be afraid of them, or God will make you afraid of them. What he's telling us is to not fear people, to not be afraid of what people say or the criticism, because Jeremiah is going to get a lot of that in his life. Today, our culture's number one value is tolerance. We're so tolerant that we're intolerant. We cannot stand any other opinions or lifestyles that are not exactly our own. But in the face of a world who will reject us, our message, and the God who gave himself up to save us. God gives us this message: do not fear what man is going to say about you. And that's a very strong word to Jeremiah, who through the 40 years of his ministry will be largely ignored and largely criticized and thrown in prison for his actions of faithfulness to God. Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 18 through 19 says, "Today I have made you a fortified city, an iron pillar, and a bronze wall to stand against the whole land, against the kings of Judah, its officials, its priests, and the people of the land. They will fight against you, but will not overcome you. For I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord." This is such a great use of poetic imagery for Jeremiah. Compare the city of Jerusalem. It's everything opposite of what Jeremiah is told in this passage. Jeremiah is a fortified city, locked in tight and firm and secure, with iron pillars and bronze walls. These are the symbols of steadiness and steadfastness. Ironically, everything Jeremiah prophesies is quite the opposite in security and steadfastness in relation to Jerusalem. Babylon will invade, and what the people thought were tough walls and tough pillars, never thinking to see the day of their own destruction, that will all fall. It will all fail. God says this about the temporary nature of our building in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 6 through 8. A voice says, "Cry out." And I said, "What shall I cry?" All people are like grass, and all their faithfulness is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall, because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever. The life and society Jerusalem had built seemed to be placed on steady bricks and mortar. Mighty stones were used to build the temple and its architecture and God's holy city. Its people seemed sure that those in it were inhabiting an everlasting, indestructible holy land. It was unthinkable that Jerusalem could fall to Babylon, just as the people aboard the Titanic felt so secure in their unsinkable fortress. The people had a false sense of security in their buildings and their history, thinking that if God preserved their ancestors, they were surely owed the same protection. This was cultural and spiritual entitlement. They felt, even as they worshipped idols and ignored God and desecrated his holiness, that God would stand by them for tradition's sake. And he did just this for many years. But the grass withers and the flowers fall. What we think is forever is just a blink in God's economy. Only what we build for Jesus will last, and everything else will crumble. This makes us ask the question, what are you building that will last? Are you building a kingdom of self and fame and wealth that is like fading grass or morning mist that will soon disappear? Or are you part of something larger than yourself or your own comfort? What kind of pillars is your house resting on? Jerusalem's pillars and its walls would fall and crumble under the hand of Babylon, and ultimately under the sovereign guidance of God. And this is what Jeremiah prophesied. Yet Jeremiah himself, even as he stood amidst the rubble of his own temple and watched his own city burn, had a more secure foundation. Jeremiah's life was built on iron pillars and bronze walls because he was founded on the unchanging love and character of God, not on the fickle, cheap plaster of man's opinion. In 1 Corinthians 3, verses 10 through 15, it says this, and this is a great description of our lives and the construction materials we build on. Like the Isaiah 40 passage, it is a humble reminder of who and what lasts in this temporary life. Sadly, it's also a reminder that the things that take up 90% of our attention, money, focus, worry, and energy, are just fuel for the fire in God's reality check. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though is only one escaping through the flames. Compare Jeremiah's building materials to that of Jerusalem. Jeremiah built with costly stones and gold, and it cost him his comfort and his friends and his reputation. He lost much in this life and gave it all to build a living temple, a living reputation for the throne of God. The people of Jerusalem built on their own desires, their own opinions, whims of foreign culture and trends, even sacrifices to foreign gods. That was grass and hay that got burned up in the Babylonian assault. Jeremiah is a book that will tell us how high those flames rise and how quickly it all fell over in the next 40 years. Jeremiah is a man that spent his life crying out to a people with this very warning, and most did not listen to him. Jeremiah had his fair share of enemies, as his message of truth and destruction was not popular. Nobody at war wants to hear that they're destined to lose the battle and so should just give up. That kind of message of surrender insults our pride. And so Jeremiah spent most of his life talking to a wall. Finally, friends, let us see how Jeremiah chapter 1 ends. At the last verse, Jeremiah 1, verse 19, it says this: "They will fight against you, but will not overcome you, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord." In the last message on Jeremiah chapter 1, I mentioned in Psalm 23 that God was a shepherd guide to David in the dark valley. Specifically, I want to cite Psalms 23, verse 5 here, which says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows." Just as David's table was prepared in the presence of his enemies, Jeremiah was promised his fair share of controversy. God very rarely keeps us from battle or from conflict. He does not preserve us in a vacuum apart from disagreement or obstacles. But what he does do is that he walks with us and fights for us in the battle. We go forward on his call and promises and let him take care of all the haters around us. You, like Jeremiah, are not alone in your pressure and pain. Jesus never promises a life of ease or popularity, but what he does promise is to be with us. And that powerful presence of the fullness of God is worth more than 1,000 likes or follows, worth more than the empty praise of the whole world at our feet. I leave you with Jesus' words to his disciples. And in many ways, this echoes God's promise of rescue and presence in the midst of adversity for Jeremiah himself. John chapter 16, verse 33. "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." Follow and subscribe for more on the Bible. This is Ben Cubbage from Whiteboard Jesus. Thanks for being with us today.